Chris, you want to start us off?
Sure. So, as a great place to here with Bruce.
Okay.
I saw the minus here, so on the right side.
Okay.
Not to advance. Because if you are standing by
Okay, so Toby and I are splitting this, but Robert and Chuck over there were also on this trip, and I know Joseph has been to Scapa Flow also. So I'm going to give the first part on history, try and do it quickly, and then Toby's going to show you more of the diving. So we went in July. Mark Curran organized it. Mark Cowan, who used to live in Chicago, has given a talk on his.
Where does he live now?
Florida.
Oh, he moved to Florida?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
And he gave a talk here on this Russian diver who went super deep in a lake and got the bends and went through experimental treatment. So he's talked about that here before. Anyway, Scapa Flow, if you don't know, it's on the far northern tip of Scotland. So, here's Europe, here's England, and here's Scotland, and it's way the heck up there. So it's quite a trip to get to. And then if you kind of zoom in a little bit, here's Edinburgh and Glasgow. And you have ways of either driving or taking trades to get up here to Thurso. I actually flew to Inverness here and then took a trade to Thurso. And then you got to take a ferry over to get to Scapa Flow and North Peaks. So here's the ferry route from Thurso. You go by the Old Man of Hoy, which is sort of a famous rock stack that was big sort of for British climbers. And then you're on the Orkney Islands here. Stromness is the town that we were in, which is a rip-roaring town. So Toby flew it. You want to say about your flight?
Yeah, so the alternative to driving up, which many folks did and drove by Loch Ness and all of those famous places, the alternative is to try to fly as close as you can to this place. The closest place you can fly into is called Kirkwall. And you fly in on one of those little bitty jets, or not even jets, turboprops on the left side there. You'll see that second picture where it says "Welcome to Kirkwall Airport." That is the Kirkwall Airport. It is a one-room schoolhouse kind of feel to it. On the way back, I pasted in a couple of pictures here from Greenland, which are what you see there. And there, the glaciers are melting, and so what you see are some rivers that are frozen over, but they are receding ever so slowly. So anyway, the idea is you can either get there, it's plane, trains, and automobiles kind of moment. You can either drive up, you can take a ferry, and or take flight.
So, if you go back one slide on the map, Chris, where's Kirkwall?
Yeah, it's on that northeast there. Yeah, okay, yeah. So if you are short on time, flying to Kirkwall, you first have to fly to Edinburgh, and then from there to Kirkwall.
Short on time, but short on weight. But
yes. Also, be very careful with your kilos. Yes,
because I expect things to be yeah. Good.
But you're carrying just here. Yes.
So did you?
So I had a checklist that had down to the milligram on stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So you get there, you hop on the ferry. This is a ferry. It's quite big. They take buses on it and everything, and you go from Thurso over to Stromness. Here's arriving at a different ferry than I was on. I'm arriving in Stromness. Otherwise, I would have had to have a really long arm for the selfie. And here we're coming into Stromness. By the way, on there, I met this cool guy on the train up to Thurso who was equipped all for bike backpacking, who was going to ride 2 days back to Inverness on the gravel roads. And so cool chat with this guy. So pretty hardcore dude. And then the weather up there is not the greatest. So this is actually a Isle of Skye, this weather sign, with that where they have the weather rock. And, you look at the rock and you get a sign of what the weather is right now. And actually, it wasn't too bad for us. The waves were not too bad and everything. But it can be pretty bad up there. So we're there to get tidy for After the trip, I went hiking on Ben Nevis, which is a pretty heavy-duty hike. It starts at sea level and it goes up to 4,400 feet, so you're kind of going up a lot. Here's nearing the summit. And then here's at the summit, and I did it for the view.
Oh yeah, that view is fantastic.
Yeah.
Next.
So anyway, the reason to go to Scapa Flow is the World War I German fleet. That's why you go. So in September, October 1918, the Germans are in retreat. Their sailors begin to desert their ships. They're bringing their ships back to harbor. Sailors jumping off, leaving their ships when they would go through like a lock and stuff. The German citizens are revolting. They usually are anyway, revolting. But the Chancellor declares that the Kaiser, the king, has abdicated the throne when the Kaiser hadn't agreed to that yet, but sort of reads the wind, puts his finger in the wind, hops off to the Netherlands. On November 11th, hostilities cease and armistice, peace treaty negotiations begin. And as part of that initial step, the Germans are required to remove their gun breeches from their ships and sail them to Scapa Flow. So a little over 70 ships arrive November 21st, 1918. And this is them sailing into the harbor. Just as an example, the lead ship in this fleet that went in was called the Seydlitz. And this ship saw a lot of action. Just to kind of give you an idea, it had one battle where it was hit by a 13.5-inch shell, and 159 crew were killed in that. Fixed back in battle on April 1916. It hits a mine, leaves a 40-foot hole, it kills 11 sailors. The Battle of Jutland, which was a big battle between the Germans and the British. This ship and another one, the Derflinger, which also was in Scapa Flow later on, sank the Queen Mary. Several British ships get sunk, it's sort of a big battle. And during that battle, this ship here is hit by one torpedo, 21 high-caliber ship shells, like, this size shell, 2 secondary battery shells, and 98 crew and 55. 98 crew are killed and 55 are wounded. So it saw some pretty heavy action during World War I. All repaired again by the time 1918 rolled around. But this is that ship leaving the Battle of Jutland, and you can see how low it is in the water. And yeah, so it's kind of amazing that it was even still afloat. Yeah. So pretty heavy battle that the ship saw. So anyway, they've sailed into Scapa Flow in November 1918, and it's a pretty crappy scene on the ships. The sailors have to get all their supplies sent from Germany. The British wouldn't let them buy coal, wouldn't let them buy fresh food, anything. It all had to be brought from Germany. Things are getting pretty filthy on these ships. Morale's really poor. They're not allowed to go on shore, so they're just sitting out there in this harbor, in this bay. 20,000 sailors arrived in November. By late December, a lot have been repatriated back to Germany, so only 4,800 remain at that point. And that's sort of where we are with these guys sort of living on filthy ships until June 2019. Then, this was the commander of the Scapa Flow fleet. The sort of guy above him didn't want to sail the German ships into this harbor, so he said, "You're going to do this." Aye, sir. So von Reiter, he's there as a commander of these ships. And, the armistice is being negotiated, no clear word yet, but he's kind of decided, I don't want the British to get my ships. He's decided this privately, but that's what he's decided. More crew go back to Germany on June 18th. So now there are only 1,800 left behind. He kind of filtered out the malcontents, which I believe most of you in this room about. Okay, so, and on June 18th, they're not supposed to really be talking much with each other, but he sends a letter around. And in that letter, it contains paragraph 11 in the letter, which reads, "It is my intention to sink the ships only if the enemy should attempt to obtain possession of them without the assent of our government. Should our government agree in the peace terms to the surrender of the ships, then the ships will be handed over to the lasting disgrace of those who have placed us in this position." Not a happy camper. Well, he believes that the original target date for signing the armistice was noon on June 21st. He didn't learn, or the British didn't tell him, according to him, that it had been postponed to June 23rd. So the British knew this. And so on June 21st, it was good weather. They sailed their fleet, which was also in the harbor. It's a good protected harbor. They sail their fleet out for some torpedo attack exercises, and they leave at 9 a.m. on the 21st. At 11:20 a.m., he changes into his full dress uniform and sends a signal out saying, To all commanding officers, paragraph 11 of today's date. That's the signal. And they put flags up, as a semaphore. So what happens is they're all prepared for this. They start to open valves and stuff like this, and they're going to scuttle their fleet. Now, the British fleet has sailed out. They've left behind a couple of destroyers, 2 destroyers, and some smaller boats. It's actually the first people to sort of realize what's going on are some school kids on this boat here, the Flying Kestrel, who are out sort of on a joyride to check on things. And they see these ships starting to sink. Like, what? So they go over to the British fleet and tell them, these ships are sinking. And so the British come around and, they're trying to board these ships and prevent this. But there's, 70 ships and there's 2 destroyers. But they do sort of confront a couple Germans, like in lifeboats and stuff. And they, in the end, 9 were killed and 11 were wounded. So the British were trying to prevent this. And then by the time the British fleet sails back into Scapa Flow at 2:30, most of the ships are sunk. So
the British shot at them?
The British shot at some of the Germans. They tried to board some of the ships, or did board some of the ships. They shot apparently a guy in a lifeboat boat who had his hands up to surrender. It was, it was
They
kind
were
of
technically still at war, even though they were in this
the armistice was not signed.
internment situation, but they were technically still.
Yeah.
All this happened. Look how this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's one of the ships going down. Again, this is the British ship that was just kind of bringing school kids around. Look, 160 school children. And here's some British, approaching one of the ships, guns at ready. Don't sink your ship.
Tough luck,
So here's a boy. So Scapa Flow has the town of Stromness up here, which is where we were based of. This fleet was mostly in this area. There's an island here called Cava, which has a small number of people on it. And one boy at the time, these are his recollections many years, they did not all sink without some effort from the few British ships. They tried to drag a few to shore, but they were unsuccessful. He made this comment about the Derflinger, which is one of the battleships that had fought at Jutland. He said it was anchored under the cliffs at the Bring on the island of Hoy, sort of in this area here. And she made a great fuss about sinking. After listing over and over until she lay on her side, then she turned turtle, and her stern shot up in the air until she appeared to be standing on her bows. Then she dived into the depths below. Something aboard her exploded, and fountains of water shot into the air. After a little while, a second explosion sent more water rocketing out of the sea above her. The water around her where she had vanished seethed and boiled for a long time after she had gone. She must have been a mighty gladiator at battle, and such an undignified death is hard to bear. So quite the sight for these people on shore.
How old was this
Wait, how old was this kid?
Like, was he 5?
No,
Like,
he might have been at the time. This recollection is from much later.
okay.
It's a little poetic license.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, probably he said, "Ma, the ships are sinking."
Right,
Yeah. So here's the Derflinger going over. You look at it, and here's all the teak decking on it. It's in great shape, but it's going down. So some of them are near enough to shore that they hit the bottom, but are still sticking up. One of them, the Seglitz, in fact, the one that I showed you that had so much battle damage and was repaired again, it sort of turned turtle, but part of the hull is sticking above at low tide. And so here's a whaling boat that got caught on the hull, 6 months later. It's a navigation hazard. Yeah. And another one went down. They could hear the masts and superstructure crunching as it broke with their weight bearing down on them into the seabed. Yeah. So some of these are deeper, some of these are shallow. So because of navigation hazards like this, there were 2 companies that were kind of signed up to salvage some of the ships. This was very new at the time to try and do this that deep. One of the companies was pretty slow at it and didn't really get to the really deep ones. The main guy who did this is a guy named Ernest Cox, who's quite a character. At age 17, he talked his way into manager of an electrical power station, self-taught that guy. So the British sort of have this very stuffy society, but they also tolerate quirky people. He was a quirky person. By age 30, he had founded his own metalworks, and then he needed metal for his metalworks, and so he undertook the job to salvage. So he bought ships for typically about £1,000 at the time, and then if he got them up, then you could have metal for his buildings. From 1924 to 1932, they raised about 40 ships, starting with the destroyers at shallow depths and getting into the really deep ships later on. I'll show you just sort of a few brief things about it. They would send divers down to patch the holes. So these divers went down and they had, this is sort of their typical salvage diver equipment. They had 16-pound lead shoes. They had a 40-pound lead weight on the back and another 40-pound weight on the chest. 60-pound diving helmets. Wow. Yeah, so this is like, not good buoyancy control. Yeah. They would go down and they would kind of seal holes. So that, one of them I remember reading was about 800 holes. Then they pump air into the ships to drive out the water and make them become buoyant over time.
Most of these ships were upside down.
Yeah, most of them were upside down. Yeah, they turned turtle when they sank. Some of them, the guns came off, and I think Toby will.
Is it because they opened all the valves, I'm assuming?
Yeah, and they were kind of top-heavy once they got water in the hull.
Right.
Yeah, the guns are up top, they're heavy stuff. Yeah.
We'll talk about the depths in a minute. But they happened to be at the depths with the spring, which was sort of a natural. You imagine them going down, 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 down.
Yeah.
Like Murphy's Law, they will end up upside down.
Yeah. So these divers, fortunately, none of them got the bends, but a couple died. They were going
to
in.
Get the bends.
Yeah, they didn't get the bends. Yeah. Because the British had, John Scott Haldane had started to invent diving tables, like we sort of use now, or are built effectively into our computers now, so that no one got the bends, but they would go into pretty dangerous conditions. They'd have, oil-infused atmospheres. Some of the ships were fueled by oil, some by coal. They recovered some of the coal to run the salvage operation. But the ships that had oil, they'd go down and they'd have these compartments, which when they put air back in them, they'd have this explosive atmosphere. So they had a couple explosions. They had another guy who died probably from a medical thing while he was down. But, this was hairy diving. Really hairy diving, much hairier than we did. And several of the larger ships, they got them up and then they towed them upside down. I'll show you a picture. Kind of crazy. And they towed them like 250 miles upside down, and you'd see some of that. So here's their salvage operation. They've got all these winches here, 20 winches on these salvage barges. They'd have one on each side. They'd put cables down, and these are hand cranked. They do 20 turns, and then they take a break, and they do 20 turns,
I guess I would need more than one.
Yeah. So this is all kind of a floating barge that was used for salvage operations, which actually was from the Germans as well. They used it for testing submarines. And then the British recovered that too. Here's one of the destroyers, one who was brought up,
So it's kind of a floating dry dock.
Yeah, kind of a floating dry dock almost. It didn't really have a floor, but they could, have these cables underneath the pull and then make the ship self-buoyant. Yeah. Here's cutting up steel from these ships. So this is high-quality German steel. Valuable stuff, right? Here's one of these, I think this was a cruiser, if I'm remembering correctly. Here it is up, and you notice a couple things.
Oh, yes.
You see, they built a little house on it.
What?
Yeah. And you see these towers here? Those are airlocks. So they'd weld those onto the hull, puncture through the hull, weld them on. And then when the divers would go down, they'd go, some of these were close enough to the surface that they could actually reach the top of the airlock from the surface. They'd go down into the hull, they'd seal off different parts of it, so they could have it be kind of balanced. They didn't always work. The starts with an H. The Heidelberg.
Yeah.
That ship, they actually raised 3 times because they sunk the first time while they were trying to raise it. A second time it was still unbalanced and they had to sink it again. So these were pretty heroic efforts. Here is the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg. Here's the Hindenburg being raised finally the 3rd time when it worked. And you can see it's got the guns on it on this one. But it's listing. And here it is under tow, this 250-mile journey to Rosyth, which is near Edinburgh. And here's the inside of the Hindenburg when brought back to the surface. you know, it looks pretty intact inside there. So, you know, they told a lot of what was valuable was not just the good steel of the hulls, but they had non-ferrous metal, brass, and stuff like that, which for the salvagers was especially valuable. This is the Hindenburg being towed in a storm. You know, good luck with that. And then here's another one, the Kaiser, after it was raised. Again, you see these airlocks that have been welded on to the hulls for people to go down and prepare the inside. And here's this trip from Scapa Flow down to Rosyth here by Edinburgh, which is where they had a big metal shipyard. By the way, that was owned by a different company than Cox's company, and he kind of accused them later on of manipulating the price of scrap iron to be lower when he'd bring a ship in. And actually, they ended up buying his operation later on, and its lead diver when he sort of exited the business by 1930. This is one of them under tow to Rosyth, you know, one good stormy weather out there. And here you see, you know, there's a guy on the hull, right?
Oh, yeah. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Maybe this is another good spot. You get a sense of the scale here too.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we see some ships in a few minutes on your water, you get some sense of like, okay, how big is this thing?
Yeah. Okay, so these show two of the salvage divers here. Again, you see there's these 60-pound helmets and these lead weights on their chests and stuff. This is this book on the salvage effort. And then there are a couple of really great books on all this. And now I think I hand over, there's Stromness, there's the harbor where we dived out of. There's looking at the harbor from across the bay, big rip-roaring town. You know, there's a picture of it, another picture from Stromness at the dock area, just kind of some scenes around the town. That's some whaleboat on the side of the building.
Do you understand the people? Yeah, some excellent accents.
Yeah. But you can understand them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They were out there for some party that one night. I never quite got the story of it.
Yeah.
It was great to see. Yeah. And then, here's an older couple in Stromness. And then, there were these kids there that when we come in at the end of the day, they'd be jumping off. You could see the piers are quite high up on the water.
Yes, they are.
They're jumping off. They're having a great time. And one thing they really enjoyed was the boat had for its cooling water and spit it out, warm water. And they'd go swim there in the water, in the warm water. Yeah. And they'd get lollipops and the caps. You know what? I think I'll now hand over to Toby for this art.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I like the, so there's a lot of quirkiness in the area here. So a lot of double entendre on pretty much everything you saw. So in this example, like this beer, which was the local beer, goes down better than the German fleet. So they're still reliving these days over and over again.
Located for all it's worth.
Yes, that's right. There's this area that is called Scapa, which, so for those of you who are even more historians than Dr. Chris over here, who are into really old stuff, like this is older than Stonehenge and things like that by several thousand years. There's some really interesting stuff here that was just literally uncovered during a storm in the 1890s. Like it was unknown until then. And so there's some of this, there's some other hinges and things like that. So for those of you who want to, experience some real history, there's something there. This was another one that you had seen on your first day there, I think.
This is like
some weird protest? Or?
No. This is like someone's getting married.
I could have guessed
Isn't this what we all do? Yeah. This is their Las Vegas, I guess, there. So, this is a cathedral that's there in Kirkwall. So remember, Kirkwall is the place that's a little bit east. It's where I flew into. It's the closest airport. They have some things there like the bell from the Royal Oak, which was a famous ship from the British that went down in that area. I had a long conversation with the woman who is probably in her 80s now. She now runs this joint, and her father ran it before her. And she was nice enough to show me where the secret switch is to turn on the light for the witch's dungeon, which is what you see here. This is where I'll give you a little short story here, though, that there's a lot of women who were not treated so well in this area, it turns out. And some of them, if they ever owned property or inherited property or things like that, the local township would basically take away their property by accusing them of witchcraft. And so they'd end up in this dungeon, and the property would become part of the county or whatever. This woman also, there was a wedding that day, so there was a formal like kilts and everything else. But it turns out that this area, the Orkney Islands, they call themselves Orcadians. They still, and it's something like 600 years ago that they became part of Scotland. It's very the long version story, but it has to do with the local king married off his daughter, and then he ran out of money, and so he basically donated the islands. Well, the Orcadians, who've been there for generations, and I mean like hundreds of years, still don't consider themselves Scottish. So the little parenthetical thing here about controversial, this woman who's now the caretaker here, she was like, I hate that we have to do these damn weddings here. But for the Scottish who come up here, like she doesn't even consider herself Scottish. She's lived there for 600 years.
The destination weddings.
Yes. Yes. So it's fascinating. This long, steep history that they have there.
She misses the surrender.
Yeah, she wasn't a part of that one. Yeah, this is a different one. So there's a museum there, which is really great. And again, just for kicks, I mean, this is Chris taking a selfie. It's me taking a picture of him taking a selfie. But just to give you a sense of the scale of a propeller. So as we look at some of these wrecks here in a minute, to give you a flavor for it, and of course the shaft goes all the way back there and even farther than this frame. So.
What are the dates of your trip?
And that's Chuck there, Mr. Sunglasses over here.
What time?
July, yeah. So we were diving for a week, and I'll show you the dives in just a second here. We were diving for a week, 2 dives a day, and they're all decompression dives. So pretty much hour to hour and a half per dive, if you care to spend that long doing it.
Dodge.
And then some people extended the trip on the front end and we're back to go and visit Loch Ness and other places like that.
Hey, you don't drive rebreather.
I
do doubles or?
I was well, you guys can describe it. I was a quasi rebreather that week. So we split up. What does that mean? It means that we split up as we're getting off the boat. We had 9 of us or so, is that right? And we were. It took a day or two to sort of sort out who was going to dive long and short, and the rebreathers tended to dive the longest periods, and so they took me on as a quasi rebreather to dive with them.
Be good double set.
Yes.
Yeah, Toby had a real
I tried not to breathe very much. Here's the lodge that we were in. So it's an interesting setup there. The captain of the ship owns the ship. She also owns the lodge, and I'm pretty sure that you're sort of like, if you get one, you get the other. It's not like you can shoot the thing. And so you get the lodge for the week, and you get the ship for the week. And then her husband owns the dive shop.
So I see it.
So they deliberately break your equipment.
Yeah, and by the way, it's amazing. Many of us got our dry suits repaired over there. It's awesome. It's actually an unbelievable way to keep things accomplished. But the lodge itself was great. 9 of us were there. I think it can house as many as 12. And we had some last minute comings and goings. At the end of the day, I think we had 9. But it was great. Very well done. It's hard to tell from here, but there's a bunch of artwork all over the place from a local artist who I have the website for if anybody's interested. But lots of just well appointed, I guess is the right way to say it. There's laundry there and all that stuff. So we were taking full advantage of it. Here's the group. And so going around the room here clockwise is the top to bottom here. And this is a couple different days. As I see, I'm wearing a blue shirt one day and a red shirt another day. So this is 2 different dinner days, I think. But a group from mostly Chicago-ish area. Everybody, I think, at one point or another lived around here. Some have now moved in different places. Greg's on the West Coast as an example. But Myron, who some of you know, owns the dive shop in Evanston, which is for sale for anybody who's looking for a deal. So yeah, this is the group. There were 9 of us. The shirt that you were wearing.
Oh, yes.
Is the same name as the ship. So here's the ship. It's a pretty amazing ship. It's not very old. This is her 2nd ship, I think, if I remember correctly. So this is only 5, 6, 7 years old at the most.
And we're sending the plans to Yitka.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll show you a couple of highlights of it in a moment. But generally speaking, the idea is, all the dive areas back here, the interior, which will show you. Yeah, we'll come to that in just a second too. But a really nice, tall bridge on it and things like that. So it's called the Huskian. So just to give you a flavor, so this is Chuck, who is over here at 6'3" or so. That's him right here. Just to give you a flavor for it, this is the ship that's bearing down on you every time we're getting ready to get out of the water. So it is actually, it's slightly hard to tell from this, but it is a really intimidating distance right here. And so she's typically driving the boat, Emily, the captain, and man, she can pull up within inches of you. It's pretty amazing. But you also wonder if on a rough day with rough currents, what would happen. But again, those of you who think in meters, these are the number of meters down here in terms of, so just to give you a sense of scale. But the point here is, big boat, really well designed. It has a crane on the back to get your stuff on and off, which is really convenient. Here's a bunch of pony bottles sitting in the middle here. We did the refilling of the tanks on the ship. So all of it, you can see all the refilling station here. So this is all kind of in real time, which is pretty amazing. One of the best things you'll hear about on this thing is this little contraption right here, which is an elevator. So when you are finished with your dive, first of all, we're all doing SMGs every dive. So we're not coming up a line as you often would in Lake Michigan or other places. So everyone's coming up sort of independently, depending on how well you were staying with your buddy, which I didn't probably do very well. But the idea is when you come up to the ship and she kind of crabs up next to you, you then just get yourself on keep your fins on, put yourself on this platform, which goes horizontal. Stand here like this and try not to get your SMB caught up in the mechanism. And she pulls you right up. It is fantastic, right? So those who have been through it say they never want to go on Yiku's boat again. For those of you who know, Yiku is 7 foot flat. So anyway, this is a real treat. We also, at the end of every dive, and I think there might be a board here in a second, you got your choice of English tea or hot chocolate, or it seems like there was a third option, wasn't there?
Beer.
Whiskey and beer would have been nice. We have that at Cam of the Day. So here's a little bit of the interior. So here's Robert drinking whatever your choice was. To give you a sense of the sort of space in the group there. She did an awesome job of having a laptop and 2 TVs in there to give you a serious briefing on every single dive prior to each dive. So this is an example, and you can see she's got a whole series of slides, and she would talk your ear off it, like I'm doing now. This was the Karlsruhe and all kinds of stuff related to it. She's a real student of history, really understood construction of ships too. So she would give you all these little nuances of when you go down there, look for this. And it was something that, had she not said that, I would have never noticed. So really cool. They also had some funny, again, quirkiness in the area. Emily's Buns and Ben's Nuts. Those are the 2 owners of the businesses here. You might want to talk about this particular spoon and what it means.
Wanker.
Yeah. So,
Some of us actually make snide comments. I don't know which one of us, but if you did, she gave you the wanker. Yes.
Do you remember what this was deserved?
did anyone else ever have it?
I think he was an all-time champion. So as you heard before, there were actually 74 ships that were there in 1919 when this event occurred. Of those, many of them got salvaged through the various methods that you heard about a minute ago. 7, with an asterisk, are still there for us to dive today. And why are they there? They were the heaviest for the most part. That's pretty much why they're there. There was an attempt to salvage all of these things, and some of them have a bunch of blast damage where they basically gave up on lifting them, and they said, well, what are the most valuable parts of it? It was the propellers, the turbines, things like that. And so they just blasted the shit out of those and took that stuff and left the rest. So that's a little bit about what's still there. So the blue ones, this was a picture from the museum I showed you a minute ago. So the blue ones here are the ones that are still there. And then the asterisk we'll talk about in just a second, which is the bind. But pretty much all the destroyers, you see that for those of you who can squint really hard from back there, there's 53 destroyers. It says here, I think those are all taken over. They're the smaller ships. And the way those were done, like as Chris was saying, was you almost use the tides in a sense. So you bring it up somewhat, and then you take it as far as you could toward the shore, and then the tide would be low. When the tide would raise up, you take it a little bit further and low, etc., etc. You sort of inch it toward the shore, and eventually you get most of these on shore. So there's 7 still there. Let's see, we showed this a minute ago, but basically they're all in this area, more or less. So here's the ones that we dived on, and just to give you a little bit of data on them. So here's a bunch of, here's the names of them. Here's the types that they were. So there's 4 light cruisers there listed there, and 3.5 battleships. To give you a sense of like, so what does this mean? What's a cruiser like? What's a battleship like? Lengthwise, they go anywhere from like 460 down to 600 plus. And then, just to give you a sense though, if like even these that are sort of 500-ish, that might be 6,000 tons, they are massively different than these 25,000 ton battleships. So I'll show you some examples here in just a minute, but just to give you a flavor for it, this is roughly the scale of the ships that we're on. And remember that every one of these is either 100% upside down, or it's cockeyed so much that you still have trouble figuring out left and right and up and down. All right. Oops. So the dives, I mentioned we did 10. So we pretty much, this will be hard for some to see maybe, but we pretty much try to cover all those 7 spots I mentioned before, plus the asterisk. So what's the asterisk? The asterisk is for the Bayern, which you saw some pictures of earlier today. The way the Bayern, which was a heavy battleship, when it turned over, they were able to pull up the bulk of the ship, but the turrets, the 4 huge, massive, I'll show you some pictures in a minute, gun turrets on this thing, were never meant to be upside down. They were just put in by gravity. Like, why would you bolt it in? So these things got turned upside down. When they pulled up this ship, those 4 turrets, which are amazingly heavy and dense and everything, had just buried themselves in the ground for the most part. And so they're still there. So the interesting is you have this like ghost of a ship situation where you have these 4 amazing, huge gun turrets, and a gun turret might be almost the size of this room, maybe let's say half the size of this room in diameter. And so there's 4 of these that are sitting, anywhere from 25 to 100 feet apart from each other. But it's basically like the outline of this upside down ship before they brought it up. It's really kind of interesting. Some of the notes, just in case anybody's wondering, so it's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. These were all my notes from the wrecks. About 50 degrees. Some of them had penetration opportunities. In fact, probably all of them do it one way or another. Some of them we could figure out. Some of them were harder to find. All of them had something unique. I won't bore you with all the details, but things like when they were salvaged, somebody forgot that there was like 1 torpedo tube on one of them that they should have taken, and they just didn't. And it's still there. It happens to be sitting vertically in the sand. There's all kinds of interesting things. Boilers, I'll show you some pictures of in a minute. Some of these were really interesting. Like this one was a mine layer, and so I'll show you some pictures in a second in a video where it's basically like a train trolley at the back. This is where they would chuck the mines off the back of the ship as they're cruising forward. So really fantastic, really interesting stuff. Some of them still have, there's one or two turbines that were left there too. That's also a very valuable part that they just either forgot about or couldn't find when they were doing the salvaging. So all kinds of good stuff here. Many of this, just to give you a quick overview here. This is an auxiliary helm. So imagine you're in the bridge. The bridge gets blown apart. there's sort of like a backup plan. And this is often someone who's sitting way in the back of the ship, way up. There's no windows, there's nothing around that. You steer based on the telephone or the telegraph or whatever they had on board to communicate back and forth. But it's basically like if the bridge gets blown up, this is your backup plan. Yeah.
I'm just curious, why night dives in the low visibilities?
You would think this is nighttime. No, this is middle of the day.
That is the middle of the day.
This is middle of the day.
How like that? On the visibility.
The depths were typically in the 100 to 120 foot range. Markgraf was the deepest to the 144. Yeah, and you can see I mentioned before that this was my own classes here. So this idea of how long their dives. They were hour to an hour and a half short. So that, but it could be a recreational dive. You could, yeah.
Down to 10 minutes.
Yeah, you could. You could. And by the way, especially in these battleships, it's really hard to explain it in a way that doesn't sound cheesy. But the battleships you could be on, and again, they're all upside down, and these battleships had such a flat keel to them that it would feel like you're on the ground. It would feel like you're sitting right here, and it's really hard to figure out like which direction.
They're building houses on it.
Yeah, you can build houses on these things. It was amazing how huge they really were. There's a lot of metal on these things, so you can imagine why the salvaging was so valuable for those who could do it. So did I answer the question? Like that's so depth was at 100, 120, very typical. Visibility not so great. Yeah, you see, this was my notes on visibility. 10 to 20. Every once in a while, maybe you get to 25 feet. 30 at the max here.
If light doesn't reach you, that's pretty bad visibility.
Yeah. Now, that's partially because we were in a bay, so the bay doesn't have a whole lot of current typically. Sometimes it does, but for the most part it doesn't. And so you don't get the worst of the sort of moving of the silt and all that kind of stuff. But so that's an auxiliary home. This is a bunch of gears. This was actually on that on the mine layer. This was some gears. I think I've got a video on this. This is a capstan. What I like about these, so this is where you would, this is World War I, so a lot of steam-driven things and a lot of oil-driven things. This would reel up the anchor chain. But what I really like about it, if you look closely, is all these little holes in it. And that's if your steam didn't work, then by God, you put the pole in it and you cranked it. And you put the pole in it and you cranked it. And so that was the idea on these, which is really amazing. Both of these are boilers. They'll look a little bit better maybe on the video, but this is one we call the caterpillar. This is one we call the spider web or spider, and it's just these boilers that have now whatever the outside hull was on them have kind of rusted away, and what's left is the interior part, which was some notion of metal, and then all these little different kind of squiggly, valves and lines and everything else coming off. So anyway, just really interesting for those of you it was very educational, I guess, for all of us, right? We all learned a lot about construction of ships around that time period. There were, in terms of wildlife, this isn't the most beautiful reef like you would find at a quarry. This isn't the Caribbean or the Midwest, clearly. We did have starfish, we did have crabs, we did have lobster, and some random little fish here and there, but it's not the most beautiful, picturesque reefs in the world. A lot of anemones and things like that. Basically, any structure would have those kind of things on it. There were lots of jellyfish. So this is a lion's mane jellyfish. This is a different kind of jellyfish. I don't know what this one's called, so you might know. The other thing, and I'll show you a video in a second, but it's hard to tell. This is a diver. This is Mark Cowan, and this is a 13.5-inch wide and I don't know, probably at least 60 feet long that circled the entire ship, steel plate. And this is they call this the Citadel, and this was basically like the armor plating on the ship. And so some of them had a lot of this, some of them didn't. But imagine how heavy that would be if you did math of like a foot or so wide times about 60 feet deep times probably several 100 or 1,000 feet around. That's the sort of structure to protect the ship.
Not just one to lift back.
Not one to look at, yeah. So let's see if the videos work. Yeah, okay. So So this is the upside down turret I mentioned before. That was gravity upside down. These are ball bearings. These are all ball bearings that the turret would use right onto, right? This is the lion's mane jellyfish rats. Sometimes you would see these on the eco stops. They would often be around that depth, around the 20, 30 feet level. Jeez. Sometimes these can be super long. I don't know if this was a young one or what. Sometimes these can be 30 or 50 feet long with their tentacles.
Is there a stingray cutting?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think they're not as bad as the Portuguese man were, but I think they're, on the spectrum.
You want to decide?
Yeah. So, and then just to give you a sense of visibility to the question about visibility, I thought this would be a good one on that. So there's a gun there. It's hard to see, but that's actually one of the big guns. This is the kind of visibility we were dealing with. So, and remember, everything's upside down here. So this is a gun turret. Like there's that window on the gun turret right there, but everything's sort of cockeyed upside down here.
So, did you have a Divemaster guide in the water with you, or just
we did those excellent briefings beforehand, and then but it was from there. It was not. And by the way,
But there you
mentioned
said
it
it's a
before,
line,
everybody's
so
got their own
it's
SMB. Yeah, you go down a line and you don't come back up that line. Generally.
Okay.
There was one or two exceptions to that, but for the most part, you
But
did.
you're not expected to come back up
Right.
the line.
So
Okay.
what she wanted you to do is she wanted everybody to basically take about the same amount of time down there, and then shoot your bags, and you might be 75 feet apart. You'd never see each other, but at least she could see you, and she could kind of drift at roughly at the same rate that you were.
Basically, there's no other boats around there.
Well, there was a shipping channel. This was a double as well. So every once in a while, and I know I face this, you guys might have as well, where you come up, and, I mean, you had no idea where you were. You might be in the shipping channel, and so she would basically give you some kind of a signal that's just like, hey, wait about 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll come pick you up as you finally drift outside the channel. Keep your S&B going during that period. What else do we have here? So this is, I think this is that. This is the breach. So earlier on, you heard about this idea that all the Germans, when they went there, they had to remove the breech of the gun. So that's what that looked like. You know, if you saw it, or we can go back if you like, but that thing that was sort of like the U shape, that was where the breech of the gun had been removed. So it makes it inoperable. So here's that capstan. Here's a little bit of all the stuff that was winding around it. I think we'll see an anchor chain in a second. The gun next to it here. So there's all this great military stuff in that. This is the business end of the gun coming up here. And so there were several of these on every ship that we dived. This was one where I think, and this is Chuck just stepped out for a second. He and I both got, I think, sort of lost upside down here. So you can see again here. You can see the upside down turret here, and you're trying to figure out now which way did I come in, and the silt comes out pretty quickly here. So you can see very. So I mean, he's probably no more than 7 feet away from me, and you very quickly lose each other.
You didn't use a guideline?
No, you couldn't. It was so massive. There's just no way. Oh, man.
Wow. I figured a lot of lines.
So, miles and miles of line. And let's see, what are the highlights on this one?
nice.
Yeah, this one was one of our better moments. Oh, this is the Citadel. So you get a sense of the width of this. Again, it's solid steel, and it goes down 40 feet or so, and then around the entire ship. Really amazing. And in this case, it was curved too, which is kind of intense.
I'm just curious, is there strictly for penetration purposes? Why didn't you use guidelines? Is it that difficult?
Well, for a lot of this area, you almost didn't know when you're penetrating and when you weren't. It was pretty dark. This is the exception, of course, the one that we're showing here in the middle, which was nice. this is so that's the breach. This sort of this U-shaped thing here. And this is another capstan. Like I said, there's two of them in a row here. They kind of work together, I think, in tandem. You can see the size of the anchor chain there. I had also heard that when the British were trying to stop them from actually scuttling themselves, part of what they were doing was actually blowing up the anchors. The British were actually firing at the anchors to try to release them and lift everybody back up. So you can just imagine like the history on each of these. Here's a nice little crab who was anxious to see us and wanted to come out and say hello. Do a little dance. And then here's the breach on this. So the reality, and this is all sideways. The person would have stood this direction. And then the last bits here. So here's that auxiliary helm that I mentioned. So this is way in the bowels of the ship.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't get torpedoed or knocked over or whatever else. All else fails, this is what he used.
Was someone usually just
Yeah, I think so. I think someone had to just man it all the time. Yeah. Yeah. This is a conning tower. So for all of you who like submarine movies and you hear about like I have the con, you have the con, all that, like this is what they're talking about. The conning tower with a rangefinder on top. So this would have been the primitive radar-ish type thing that they had at the time. It has a second half of it, which has fallen off and is in the sand now. So this is one half. This would have rotated around.
So radar-ish, what do they use?
What for this barrel? Probably. Yeah, about 12 or
15. Yeah.
Up here goes up, and switched up.
Yeah.
You're seeing left to right.
So it's like your eyeballs, just imagine them slightly wider, and then now you're trying to fire on some target that's 8 miles away or something. That's kind of the idea.
So wait, you did do the U-boat? Because I didn't see.
Oh, you did. I mean, I know it's beat up, but
There's several conning towers. Actually, many of those still have conning towers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a U-boat out there too.
Yeah, we did not get to that. I think that's off limits. But there are several conning towers.
But you didn't miss much. It's great.
Is that right? Yeah. So this is the kind of like this wildlife you'll find on these. In this case, there was a little crab hanging out inside this. Kind of cute.
Yeah. Sherry thinks you're cute too.
Yeah, he was like, "Why are you here?"
Just wake them up.
All right, and then I don't know if let's just see if the Wi-Fi will work. This is the last bit of the show here, so bear with me. Let's see if it works.
Are you on there? Wi-Fi?
Well,
I got it.
we'll see. And if not, I'll send you guys the link. Maybe this will work.
Curious, you send this other show.
Oh, it's not showing.
So what he's going to show you, we learned about at the end of the week,
It's not.
which I was glad of.
There's I think.
Did you guys hear about it earlier? What's that? Did you hear about the Orcas earlier? No, did you hear about it earlier?
Who's yourself? Tell us exactly what.
It was before we were there. Oh, okay. But did you hear about it during? Oh, you did. Okay. I only heard about that from that.
Hope to say.
It's slowly loading, but literally the day before, well, 2 days before we got there, there was a pod of orcas right over our dive site. Yeah, this is gonna be painful to. It's about a 45-second video that's gonna take 2 hours, so we'll see. But there's a whole pod of orcas here. How long did this that showed up? Well, they actually stayed all week, just slightly farther away from where we were. But the day that we were there,
We got down the sign.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. They got the early adopters. But if you look closely, there's a seal around which somewheres.
They don't lucky.
And the orcas are just playing with the seal. They actually drove the seal toward the boat. The seal was like wide-eyed open, kind of like get me on that elevator, please. And you'll see at some point here they catch the seal and flop it around a little bit, and the matriarch that was it back there. I think maybe, or maybe it's this one. Maybe it's there. But they had their way with the seal.
Do they at least eat it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, at least if they eat it.
Yeah.
You don't feel quite so dead.
This is pretty amazing. So I've never dived with orcas before. We just missed these by 48 hours. But maybe next time.
And I was imagining, being on a deep stop in poor visibility and having an orca appear.
Right. Whoa, it's not exactly the jellyfish. Yeah. So pretty amazing. Pretty amazing on many dimensions.
But okay, so Steve didn't agree that it's shell stage, but we're ice sauce.
They're just finishing up. It might be looping at this point. I don't know. Anyway, all right. So I think that's it. Any questions, comments?
So being someone who's loved the show Outlander, and I've only read the first book, but how far is it from like the Scottish Highlands?
Well, you guys who drove through it, you guys drove through the islands?
Oh, okay.
What was the
So it's
distance?
on the way?
Yeah.
Okay. So I could like visit that and then go through this.
Yeah.
You're in first. I mean, you're basically the highlands.
Okay.
When you cross something called the church port.
Yeah.
So that whole area is still islands.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
6
Anything else?
And my family came and joined. We spent a week on the Isle of Skye. It was awesome.
Oh. Yeah.
Now, how much
We're looking at another trip next year already. So.
Oh,
he's interested. Yeah.
how many dive?
How often do people dive in this area?
Yeah. So there's very little infrastructure there.
Yeah.
And so you're almost sort of beholden to this crew who are great, and they're going to probably be there another 20 years, which is excellent because they're pretty young and all that. And someone like Mark, who again some of you have met, this is his second time there, but he's already starting to try to organize something next year for those who liked some of these ships, and the idea would be we go there and we just dive those ships and explore as much as we can of those ships.
There are some of us are pretty well preserved.
Yeah, I mean they're in pretty good shape. The husband he would actually oftentimes jump in a little before us or a little after us and go into his own little secret hidey hole. So he's trying to document it and document many of these. And they have a book coming out and maybe some videos and things like that too.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Is the wife, the captain, is she also a diver?
Yes.
Okay, I would
Yeah.
want to know if the captains are also divers.
Yes, she is, and she has a lot of what she would show us were her own videos or videos of herself as the model, one way or the other, depending on which side of the camera she was on. And so she was able to talk with, first-hand experience about like, hey, go to this spot. If you like this, go there. If you like that, go there. And
Very respectful.
yeah.
Okay. And then,
What is this minimum training you need to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're all into dry suits. We were all using SMD every single shot.
But the water was in the fin.
By the way, as a side note, not everybody expected that, and so there was a surprise on day one as people try to fumble with their stuff and realize like,
everyone had doubles. You can't be on singles.
yes, no, but things like the SMBs and like a lot of people haven't done that in a long time.
But you have to be on doubles to be down there.
Yes.
If you're on-
Doubles and Digo gas.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, you can't be on a single tank. You're already gonna be there.
You don't have to, but to get your like money's worth, I would say yes,
So
doubles
at
and
least
Ecos.
doubles.
They're
Only.
So tech
I mean,
that.
give it
Tech
back to
that.
120 people. And you definitely need to be.
I think 120.
You need to be comfortable in a slightly ambiguous environment. You need to be able to deal with slightly less than 100-foot visibility.
Daytime, night dive.
Daytime, have 3 lights with you. Like those are all good habits.
Where do they charge? Base around.
What did they charge you? It was actually, and I don't know if this is due to exchange rates or whatever, but it was actually quite reasonable. it was something like $1,000 for the week, and that included the housing and the diving, and then you paid for your gas, you paid for your tanks and stuff. Like in our cases, we were refilling snorkels every time, and then I was refilling that tank for each days maybe. But it was very reasonable.
Would you be able to view of that?
Yeah. So in this case, yeah. So I don't know if they.
Well, technically speaking, these depths are all within recreation.
Yes, we could do recreation. You could do you could take half of.
Yeah.
You could
go in Michigan. You could do that. Technically, you need to shoot it almost.
I mean,
If we go back to
your chart.
Okay, sorry. Once we get there. Yes, we got a lot of pictures.
I sure got a lot of pictures.
Wow. There we go. So, we'll make this full screen. But so these were in the like 70 to 80 minutes, and a lot of these. But you can imagine doing this in 25, 45.
Yeah.
So
You could do
yeah.
it.
So none of this is crazy. Even the Mark graph, like I went to 144. You wouldn't have to go to 144.
Sure.
You could go to the keel upside down, and it's probably at 75 feet or something. So.
Got it.
So again, is there a certain level of depth?
Advanced.
I mean, recommended versus required. Required, you don't have to. Recommended, I mean, I think those of us who are tech trained is a good, like a deco. Again, you very likely are going to be feeling like you're solo.
Well, you guys have, for the people who were down on rebreathers when you on nitrox, at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Try.
Yeah, so most of these, so we would try to optimize our nitrox, so somewhere in the 30-ish range for a lot of these, 35 for some of them, and then a deco bottle of your choice. In my case, I was using 8% most of the time.
Got it.
Which gave me a little bit of
And for
wiggle
the
room.
people that don't dive a lot, 80,
Yeah,
80 at what depths? At what, 10, 20 feet? Maybe
yeah, anywhere from 33 and
Okay.
above. Yeah. Yep. So, recommended, not the pretty reefs, but for those who like wrecks, who like learning about history and a little bit of an adventure, it's a bucket list kind of place. That would be my elevator pitch.
Also, the greater Orkney area, you drive around the islands, the hinges that you alluded to are incredible.
Yeah.
There's hinges there
Yeah.
that more people would, if they weren't so remote,
Yeah.
they're not comparable in size, but in beauty is Stonehenge.
Yeah.
It's beautiful spikes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you did you check it in.
Yes.
Yes, Scarab Ray.
Yeah.
The museum alone, I thought was
Yes, the museum was great. Yeah.
So you're just doing one night.
Two. Two. Yeah. It was. You'll see the dates here. So 2 on each date.
Oh God.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we would do one, and like I said, there was hot chocolate in between, but and meals and things like that. But the general sense would be you do one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and then that was it.
Was watch Outlander to go back on time. Like when 1600 first.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Any other questions?
So I read this in West
Yeah.
Show us.
You can also, if